Chapter 14. God's glorious Son. John chapter 11. Jesus' disciples have seen him calm storms on troubled Sea of Galilee. They have seen him heal the sick from a distance. They have even seen him feed multitudes of people who have come to hear him teach. But they had not yet seen how Jesus would respond to our greatest enemy. What will Jesus do when he is faced with death? How will he handle the death of a loved one? This will reveal who Jesus really is. This is the subject which John has reserved for Jesus' final miraculous sign. Jesus was told about Lazarus. John 11, 1-16. Jesus was an itinerant preacher. He traveled from place to place in the country of Israel. One of the places where Jesus loved to stay was a village called Bethany. This village was just a few miles outside of the city of Jerusalem. In this village there lived a man named Lazarus. His sisters Mary and Martha also lived in the same village. One day Lazarus became ill. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." Verse 3. Jesus was in Galilee at the time. Galilee was a 2-day journey north from Bethany by foot. So it took Mary and Martha's servant 2 days to get to Jesus. When Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he made a comment. This sickness will not end in death. Verse 4. Notice that Jesus did not say that Lazarus would not die. Jesus said that the end result or the purpose of this sickness would not end in death. No, the purpose of the sickness, is for God's glory so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Verse 4. Jesus knew that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Jesus also knew God's purpose for this resurrection. It was so that many people could see who Jesus was. Even though Jesus loved these people, he did not seem to be in a hurry to get to see Lazarus. He stayed where he was 2 more days. Jesus was in total control of the situation. He knew that Lazarus was going to die. He also knew how long it was going to take for this to happen. He even knew how long Lazarus would need to be in the grave before his resurrection would be considered to be a real miracle by the Jewish people. Then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." Verse 7. After calming the disciples' fear about going back to Judea, Jesus said, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." Verse 11. The disciples misunderstood Jesus' words. They took his words literally. They thought that if Lazarus slept, he might get better. But Jesus meant his words symbolically. When Jesus said that Lazarus had fallen asleep, he was using a metaphor for his death. Jesus told his disciples that he was going to wake him up, by which he meant he would raise Lazarus from the dead. They did not understand what he was saying, so they missed this prediction. In order to clarify things, Jesus spoke to them plainly. "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe." Verses 14 and 15. Jesus had a clear grasp of God's purpose for this event. Lazarus had to die and be raised from the dead in order that the disciples could believe that Jesus was the Son of God. Jesus arrived in Bethany, verses 17-37. When Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Verse 17. The Jewish people believed that a dead person's spirit would linger around a body for 3 days after they died. When the 4th day came, it was understood that this person's spirit had departed. This explains why John mentions the timing. It also explains why Jesus took his time before coming to see Lazarus. Martha went out to meet Jesus and expressed her disappointment. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Verse 21. Can you hear her heart's cry? If only Jesus had been here when Lazarus was sick, he would have been able to heal Lazarus. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Verse 22. She believed that even after Lazarus was gone, God would still answer Jesus' prayers. That was an amazing declaration of faith. Jesus picked up on her statement when he said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Verse 23. Jesus was going to pray. He was going to ask his Father to raise Lazarus from the dead. God was going to answer his prayer. "Keep on believing, Martha." But Martha went back to her traditional understanding of what Jesus meant. "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Verse 24. At this point, we are going to skip a few verses, but we will address these verses in chapter 21. Later, Mary came out to see Jesus. She used the same words that Martha had used. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Verse 32. Jesus saw Mary weeping. This is a comforting word for everyone who loses a loved one. Jesus sees you weeping. He was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Jesus understands our grief. Jesus asked to see the tomb. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. Verse 34. They showed him where Lazarus was buried. Then we have the most sympathetic and powerful yet shortest verse of the Bible. Jesus wept. Verse 35. The people around Jesus observed Jesus weeping. They made an important comment. "See how he loved him." Verse 36. When we weep at the passing of someone, it is not as a sign of weakness. It is a sign of love. There were some unkind people who were skeptics at this funeral. They were ready to attack Jesus at any chance they could get. They said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Verse 37. Did you notice? These people had seen the healing of the blind man as recorded in John 9, but they were still skeptical. They wanted to advance their new idea that it must be Jesus' fault that Lazarus had died. Jesus could have kept Lazarus from dying, but he didn't. That must mean that Jesus doesn't really love these sisters. They were attacking Jesus at the very sensitive time, but they did not care. They wanted to attack him. Jesus came to the tomb, verse 38 and 44. When Jesus came to the tomb, he was deeply moved again. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance, verse 38. Jesus described the tomb to help us understand what Jesus said next. "Take away the stone," he said, verse 39. Martha protested, "But Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days. Jesus responded to Martha, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you will see the glory of God?" Verses 25 and 26. The Jews did what Jesus told them to do. They took the stone away from the entrance to the tomb. Jesus gave thanks to the Father just as he did with the loaves and the fish. Now Jesus thanked God for answering prayer. He thanked his Father for hearing him. Jesus prayed this way so that the people who heard him pray would believe in him. Jesus gave a command to the corpse. He said, "Lazarus, come out." Verse 43. John explained the situation. His hands and feet were wrapped with strips of linen, and a cloth was around his face. Verse 44. Jesus gave another command. "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Verse 44. Lazarus was both alive and free, a miracle. The glory of God shines through the person of his Son. The Sanhedrin didn't know what to do about Jesus. Verses 47 and 48. Here is this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will put his trust in him. Jesus has the power to raise the dead. He is God's glorious Son. Who did this miraculous sign point towards? The resurrection of Lazarus pointed towards Jesus. Jesus is God's glorious Son.